Greetings, everyone. I'm so glad you're here today joining me on Satiate, the Boulder Nutrition Podcast. I'm Sue Van Raes, your host, functional nutritionist, food psychology specialist, and founder of Boulder Nutrition. I also lead women's wellness and yoga retreats both locally and internationally. You can find out more about me at bouldernutrition.com. My inspiration with Satiate is to offer you functional nutrition, food psychology, and well-being insights, to share with you case studies and stories that can act as salve for your soul, to share with you some of my most favorite special guests and experts from all over the country, and to offer you an opportunity to satiate your body, mind, heart, and soul. If you love this podcast, I would be so grateful to have you head over to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a review. That will help me get the podcast out into the world to the listeners who need it most. I want to take a moment and introduce today's special guest, Dr. Alan Fogel. He is a professor of psychology emeritus at the University of Utah and has been an active contributor to research on emotional development in human relationships from infancy through adulthood. His many books include Developing Through Relationships, Infancy, Infant, Family, and Society, Body Sense, the Science and Practice of Embodied Self-Awareness, and Restorative Embodiment and Resilience, his newest book, a guide to disrupt habits, create inner peace, deepen relationships, and feel greater presence. When not working, he finds restoration in gardening, singing, and playing the guitar, hiking and skiing in the mountains near his home in Salt Lake City, Utah, swimming and biking, and being with his family and friends. Thank you so much for being here today, Alan. It's been a little journey getting to know each other, and I'm so glad we finally get a chance to come face to face.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So a few months ago, I was doing research and I came across your article in Psychology Today, which really inspired me because it was one of the first times I found something that really matched closely to a lot of the work that I do in my practice. And that was about embodiment and eating. And I am just so excited that we were able to get in touch and connect. And then here we are today for the podcast. What a great opportunity for us to share this with some other listeners. So I know that you specialize in embodied awareness and that you have a lot going on in your business and your life with how you're getting your work out in the world. But one of the things that I thought would be great to start with is in your article, the original article that I read, there was a lot in there which was suggesting that mindfulness in food choices and also in our own body satiety can really play a role in our eating. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, it's interesting. I just want to kind of comment or remark on the word mindfulness, first of all. Because it's a much used word right now. And it's a word that I'm not particularly happy with because it starts off with the word mind. And I mean, some people have said that maybe we should call it bodyfulness.
I love that.
If we're talking about embodied awareness, because the mind, of course, is very powerful. When I say mind, I'm talking about all of our thought processes, and we can use those kinds of mental processes that help us to modulate or regulate our food choices or how we eat or what we eat or decisions we make about eating, body image, all of those kinds of things. But I'm talking more, I mean, my work is more focused on how we actually feel about food. Not only about food in general, but how food feels when it goes into our body. And the whole experience of shopping and food preparation and eating and sharing meals, I'm more interested not so much on paying attention, which is like mindfulness, which is more like focusing our attention on, well, what am I going to make tonight, and are my kids going to eat it, and that's sort of like what I would consider mindfulness, like really, or thinking about, diets or nutrition or those sorts of things. Um, Embodied awareness is more about, can I just let go and relax while I'm cooking? Can I enjoy the smells of the experience of cooking? When I go to the store and I go shopping, can I let myself be or indulge in the colors of the different fruits and vegetables, or the smells, or the textures? Can I really just be in the present moment with my felt experience? And the same thing is true for, consuming food, flavors and feelings connected to that. But it isn't just about those sorts of sensory kinds of awarenesses that I just described. Embodied awareness also includes emotion. So, I'm sure you know, a lot of dysregulated or disordered eating patterns come from a suppression of our emotions. We eat because we don't want to feel. And there's a lot of interesting research on that topic. So people with eating disorders are less attuned to their own body signals and less attuned to their own emotions. So part of becoming, developing a better relationship between food and our bodies is getting in touch with our emotional feelings around food, or the feelings that food brings up.
I love this because I think that first of all, we can be so fast paced and so busy that we run into the grocery store, we grab something really quick because we're like trying to get home to feed the kids or to feed ourselves or to make dinner, or to kind of complete the daily tasks. And slowing down and being able to be present, really what you're saying is like presencing ourselves through the attention to what's right in front of us, our senses, but also our emotions. And as you know, my work is so focused on women and food, and it's very integral with exactly what you're saying, with getting clouded by the emotions and therefore basically wanting to check out and escape. And obviously comfort is a great way to escape, and food being comfort, and pleasure, it can be used that way, but there's just so much there to work with when we actually start the process of embodying our eating, which is something I talk about a lot. And so I love your angle on this. And I really do find that that word mindful is very confusing in our world. It's also very trendy. And I think sometimes when words get really trendy, they lose their potency, and then they kind of get thrown around a lot, like, in conversation. So bodyfulness, I was just writing something recently where it was called Bring Your Body to the Table.
Hmm.
And that, that really reminds me of what you were saying, because there's so much going on in our bodies that we can work with. And yet so many of us are so clearly not paying attention to that because either we don't know how, or it's too scary, or there's something, that is weighing us down that can make that really challenging. So there's, that piece of getting from not feeling embodied to feeling embodied. And I guess really that's the question, is like, how do we get there? I know for so many of the women I work with, there is that interoceptive disconnect, which is so challenging to imagine having repaired. And yet I know it's possible. I've seen it. And at the same time, it's fairly daunting to start when we're feeling so disconnected. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, which comes from your article, is when you want to, improve your situation through therapeutic lifestyle changes, and how you can increase your body sense, how are those related? What can we do to really work towards that repair?
Mhm.
I know that was a long question.
Yeah, but it was a good one because it's really important. I mean, I think that's the question that's on so many people's minds, and especially if you're suffering from an eating disorder, or you're suffering from a body image disorder, or all of those things. I mean, it doesn't feel good, and you want to get out of it, but you don't know how, and you may feel trapped in that, a kind of never-ending cycle. Um, you I just want to come back to something you said about eating for comfort. I mean, there is a way in which we eat because there's something that we don't want to feel. So in that sense, you could think about eating as soothing or comforting. But I've worked in my clinical practice with men and women around food issues. And when I really kind of get down into we could call it the psychodynamics, or the embodied experience around eating, it doesn't really come out to me as eating is comforting. It's more like eating is I would put it more in the category of an addiction.
Absolutely.
In that sense, so, people drink alcohol or take recreational drugs, or there's so many forms of addiction. We could be addicted to exercise. We can be addicted to food. It runs through a part of our nervous system that's really about avoidance. It's not so much about comfort. There might be an immediate kind of feeling good from, that extra glass of wine, or, that extra puff of marijuana, or whatever it is that people do. But it doesn't last very long. And when that fades away, all of the feelings of depressed feelings and shame and disgust, and all those feelings that we can have about ourselves, that probably came from a life history of trauma or abuse, or disrespect, people who didn't really care about us or didn't listen to us. I really find that that's at the root of so many compensatory behaviors, that some of which show up as eating disorders.
I absolutely agree. I see it all the time when we talk about food. It often becomes the symptom rather than the root of the problem.
Mhm.
Yeah. And getting to the root with people can be, it can take a little while, and it needs, to have some vulnerability, and we need to be courageous to go into the shadow side sometimes of our psyche to really uproot what's there and what needs healing. But I think over time, with consistent support and, kind of a slow and steady approach, we can get there. But it's definitely, it's a journey.
Well, that's so true what you said. And again, I see it in my own clinical practice. It takes a long time to accept, to embrace, to feel the effects of all those, traumatic wounds and injuries, not necessarily physical, but mostly psychological. And in a way, I find a kind of hopefulness in that. I mean, I think about my own developmental process and I think about my clients. Um, and the hopefulness part is that we can heal, we can recover if we give ourselves the right amount of time and space and find the right modality or the right practitioner to work with. So and I think that people often get locked into cycles of despair and discouragement, like this is never going to change and I'm going to get fatter and fatter, or I'm going to never get out of this disordered pattern of relationship to food, or, so I think the fact that we do have treatments, we do have approaches, we do have educational techniques that really do get to the root cause of eating problems. And there's just so much more now going on in relation to body awareness, which excites me about the way the field is going.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A term I've been really fond of lately is body compassion. And, it just really sums up that there is the antithesis of that is really prevalent and very much an epidemic in our culture. And how we can eventually turn our focus to more of a compassionate approach with our bodies and a loving approach with our bodies is so much more effective than, some of the other prescriptive type eating regimens that are restrictive, and even some of the self-care practices that are in a sense just kind of superficial, I think. And it's not to say that they're not valuable, but I don't know if we can really equate self-love with pedicures. Like that's something I think that we often think like, oh, I'm going to treat myself today and do some self-care. And, in a sense that is, beautifying and it's nice and it's relaxing, but there is a deeper conversation I think that we need to get into when we really want to talk about body compassion and self-love and how those can play out in our eating.
Yeah, I totally agree. But again, I think that well, let me go back to, anytime we're talking about prescriptions or prescriptive practices, like a diet, a particular kind of diet, or, a particular set of rules for the way we approach, eating or food, or a set of mindfulness practices, whenever we're kind of tying things up neatly into some kind of regimen or set of practices. The research that I've read pretty much shows that those are eventually doomed to fail. And that's just going to lead into, it's just going to feed back into that cycle of discouragement and helplessness. Because those kinds of, if we think we can get better just by following a routine, then we start to get hopeful about that. But typically it lasts for a few months and then we can't do it anymore. We can't keep it up. It doesn't really fit us, or the motivation goes away or whatever. And I think in some ways those things are counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. And in a sense, they can become addictive in themselves and
Yeah.
override what's actually still the root issue.
Right. Yeah. So I think getting to the root issues, which are largely life history, emotional, ways in which we get in touch or lose touch with our body awareness. that's what really works. And
Yeah.
that's what the research shows.
Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
what's hard. It's hard to do that. It's not an easy path because then we have to start to feel, um, really feel, for example, our shame around our body image or around the way we eat or who told us, something or criticized us for how we ate or for how we looked or all of those kind of things. And there's so much pain connected with that. So it's so important to have a compassionate guide to help us rebuild our own self-compassion.
Absolutely. So I know that it's a very big question and probably much too big for this conversation, but maybe you can give us sort of a few ideas of what we can do to begin the process. I know that obviously this is, a project that could take years and even lifetime to feel like we've healed or repaired some of that old paradigm of belief that has got us to where we are with our eating and our body image. And yet there's also, things we can start to do to become more embodied with our awareness or to at least acknowledge some of the deeper issues. What would you say you would start somebody doing if you were working with them in this way to help them initiate some healing?
It depends on where people live and what resources they have available. Um, although so much now can be done online. I mean, I think the pandemic has taught us that we can
Definitely.
do therapy online, we can do classes online, so it's no longer so much tied to location or even income because, we can distribute uh, possibilities across a wider number of people. So, but basically, I would say any program that focuses on developing body awareness that's not prescriptive, that is open, that allows us to express ourselves freely. Um, and, actually, there's one study I came across as I was writing this new book of mine, which was done in Melbourne, Australia. It was a study of women who had eating disorders who participated in a yoga class. So, and the yoga class, let me just look at my notes about this so I get it straight. It was a 12-week yoga program, and it had three main focuses. One was body awareness about feeling the difference between movement and stillness, like when you move into a posture and when you stay still in a posture. Okay, that's interesting to me. That first goal of the program is interesting to me because it's just pure body awareness. It has nothing to do with eating. And the second goal of the program was awareness of breathing patterns, which of course is part of a lot of yoga practices. And the third goal is what they called mindful eating. And the participants were taught to, I'll just quote, remove all distractions when eating, such as TV, books, smartphones. Pay attention to the amount of food placed in the mouth, how it tastes, and wait until swallowing that mouthful before taking more food. Okay, that's what they taught. They didn't teach anything about what kinds of food to eat. They didn't teach anything about food restrictions or how much you should eat. Just those three things about body awareness and staying in touch. So at the start of the study, one of the women in the group said, they had just group discussions, and she said, How is it possibly to be so unconscious of the way you appear, yet be so obsessed with it? I think I dissociate from my body 90% of the time. And another woman said, I hate what I'm doing to myself. I recognize it as self-punishment, mutilation, but my intellect and emotions aren't communicating with each other. My body feels awful, aches and pains all over, bloated, constipated, flatulent, headaches, nausea, puffy ankles. This was a quote from one of these people just starting the study. And basically what they found was that at the end of this 12-week study, all of the women improved in their body image, their relationship to food, all of the things you would expect or would want them to, and it didn't have anything to do with dieting. Here's a quote from one of the participants at the end of the program, which I really like, and I'll tell you why I like it after I read it. She said, so she was talking about the body awareness of being hungry and getting comfortable with feeling hungry, which is pretty fascinating, right? Like just to be able to tolerate the sense of feeling hungry.
So phenomenal. Yeah.
She said, I feel peaceful and hopeful. I'm eating like a normal person, enjoying what I eat and not obsessing like usual. I am not currently afraid of feeling hungry. Sometimes I enjoy the feeling of hunger as my body digests the lovely, healthy food I just fed it.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's such a simple intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't necessarily involve the things you and I were just talking about, coming to terms with emotional trauma and all of that. It was just about paying attention to our bodies and learning to feel comfortable with the discomforts of our bodies.
Absolutely. When we break it down like that, it's interesting that it can be, for lack of a better word, simple in the practice of embodiment, which I think there are many ways to get there. A lot of my clients that I work with, especially around disordered eating, I find that when they have some kind of embodiment practice, yoga being probably, the most popular, but there's many, that it really can anchor the work that we're doing so much more fully. Just something so simple as breathing and being aware of it, and sensing and being aware of it, and relaxing the mind, and letting the breath relax the thoughts. These things can be so powerful. And not always. I think we can also do yoga very fast and very disembodied if we're not even aware of that as an option, or if we're kind of looking at yoga maybe as just exercise where we just get in and out, and it could be any kind of movement. But I also think just about any kind of movement can bring that same quality if we bring the awareness to it. I find that when I'm hiking or when I'm dancing or so many other things, because we are intending it and because we are basically slowing ourselves down. So I absolutely agree with that study. And yet I'm glad that you were able to break it down in such basic terms for us, because it really does show that we can make progress with these simple aspects of our daily practices.
Well, one thing I like about this last quote is, I feel peaceful and hopeful. That's what she said. And this book that I wrote that's due out this fall, it's called Embodied Restoration and Resilience. I'm focusing on this idea of restoration, embodied restoration, or restorative embodied self-awareness. And that's a state where we really slow down and come to rest, like what you were just describing.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, I can go on a hike and I can be in my thoughts the whole time and not really notice the beauty of the trees or the mountains or whatever is around me. And I'm getting exercise, but I'm not getting restored. But if on my hike, if I stop and I really like just take in, the feeling of the breeze or, the color of the trees or the sky or the water or the rocks and just really let it, come into me and become part of me. Then I can feel my heart rate slowing down and I can feel my breathing getting deeper. And I can feel myself coming into this more deeper, peaceful state, which I call restorative because it feels restorative. I mean,
Mhm.
like
It
everything's
sounds
coming alive.
restorative.
Yeah, everything's coming alive inside me. But it's also interesting that if you look at the physiology of that state, you'll find that when our breathing slows down, when our heart rate slows down, um, when we come to a state of rest or a sense of peace, and we stop thinking, we're just where we are in that moment, it changes all the functional systems of the body. Our digestion will start working better. Our heart, our cardiovascular system will work better. Our immune system function will work better. It's amazing, it's such a simple thing to come to rest, or it's such a simple concept that just coming to rest and giving ourselves the opportunity to come to rest can be so therapeutic, literally healing. So we're restoring not only ourselves in the sense of finding a sense of peace, but we're restoring our physical health as well.
I absolutely agree. One of the things I love to do on my women's retreats is do this practice called forest bathing, which you may have heard of. Um, and the research on forest bathing out of Japan is actually pretty profound. I always get people asking me if they're going to go swimming in a creek or something and if they need their bathing suit, which is funny. But we only do it for about 10 or 15 minutes in the woods, often up in the mountains of Colorado. And, there'll be like a group of 20 women on a hike and we'll spread out into the forest and I'll explain a little bit about the history of forest bathing and the health benefits. And then we'll spread out and we'll go find our own little spot to sit and be, which I don't think that many of us do very often in the forest. I mean, we might do that in a park, but we don't often find ourselves sitting and being in the forest, more hiking or something. But it's so amazing what happens in 15 minutes with these women and how they can discover, a whole different element of nature and its restorative benefits, which is what reminded me of what you were saying, to bring that into our lives more regularly in some way. It can be so powerful.
Mm-hmm. So I love that idea. I hadn't heard about it before.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. But it reminds me about, some studies I came across when I was researching for this book about the sense of awe, AWE. Um, and, it's an emotion, it's a feeling that's fundamentally restorative.
Uh-huh.
I mean, um, and, you know, where and how we come to a feeling of awe may be different for different people. So, for some people, maybe it's being in that forest and just taking it in and being, coming to a place of, you know, just noticing the beauty of everything that's around you. But for some people, it might be going to a religious service, coming closer to who they feel or their connection to whatever they define as God.
Hmm.
Also bring a sense of awe. Or being with a child, or being with a lover, in a way that's open and awesome, literally. So there's just so many ways. Some people could get it from river rafting. That wouldn't work for me because I'm terrified of rapid water. It just fills me with fear and anxiety.
Right.
But um, but you know what I mean. And the interesting thing about awe is it's connected to two things, which I'm going to mention just because it helps us to be aware that we're in that state. One of those things is a sense of oneness,
Mm.
like we're not separate from the forest, we're not separate from the earth, we're not separate from God, we're not separate from our lover. We're not alone. Um, and the other is what some people have called a sense of the small self. And the small self doesn't mean that we're unimportant. It just means that we really get that we're part of something bigger.
Hmm.
Um, and there's something about those feelings, and I notice, because I'm looking at you, that you just took a deeper breath. And that's a good example of the physiological changes that happen when we really come into that place of amazement or wonder. But I really love that concept of the small self because it takes us out of the daily worries and cares and brings us into something much bigger than ourselves. And that in itself can create a sense of purpose and hopefulness, and courage, to go back and do some of the hard things that we might need to do in our lives.
Really, that kind of circles right back to being restored in a way that we have our energy intact to
Mhm.
show up more fully with what we need to do, or the service that we want to give to the world, or however we want to show up in our circle of life. When we have that ability to restore, there's more energy to give back, which is
Yes.
more of like a flow rather than a force, and that's always something I've had to work on, flowing rather than forcing, because I can get very assertive with my work or with my daily tasks, and then it's like, okay, wait, take a breath, slow down, and move from a place of wholeness rather than scatteredness or whatever it is.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that example. And I think so many of us get trapped into doing.
Mm.
We finish one task and then we go to the next one and we go to the next one because it's never ending. There's always something to do.
Yeah.
And the busier your life is with work or family or, other commitments, the harder it is to make that choice to take some time, even if it's just 15 minutes, just totally for ourselves to be in that place of peace or being settled it's just so healing.
Yeah. I love it. And I so agree. I know that your new book you said it's coming out in the fall,
Mhm.
and I'm sure there's a pre-order date. Is that true?
I'm not sure. It's being published by a company called North Atlantic Books.
Okay.
So you could start checking their website, probably in the summer. They'll have probably by then a cover and,
Yeah. Yeah.
more information about
I know that you mentioned earlier before we hopped on the podcast that you had some excerpts from your book that were related to our topic of conversation. I'd love to hear those if you're up for sharing them.
Yeah, I'll do a little reading from the book. Um, this is just about the experience of eating. And in the book, I make a distinction between dysregulated embodied self-awareness, which is where we find ourselves when we're lost or depressed or stuck in some way, or we're suffering from an eating disorder. We've lost touch with our body. That's a dysregulated state of embodied self-awareness. And then there's a middle state, which is called modulated embodied self-awareness. And this is where we have some sense of our body. We're kind of aware of it, but we're still doing a lot of thinking, and we're organizing our lives according to routines and thoughts and plans. And those might include, well, okay, I'm going to set my phone to set an alarm that, I'm going to do 15 minutes of meditation. Okay, that's all part of what I call being modulated. That is, we're not dysregulated. We're not in that place of stuckness. We have some strategies, we have routines, we have skills. We may have some of those diets we talked about earlier. And then the third state is this restorative state, where we're not thinking at all. We're totally in the present moment. So this little excerpt is about eating a chocolate dessert. Now, I chose chocolate because I love chocolate, but you and your listeners can imagine eating something really delicious that you love. It doesn't have to be chocolate.
I usually choose chocolate anyways, so that's
okay.
That's perfect.
And I'm going to read an excerpt what it might feel like to be in a modulated, to eat that piece of chocolate cake in a modulated way compared to a restorative way.
Okay.
Okay, so the title of this example is called Chocolate Decadence. And chocolate decadence is the name of a particularly rich and creamy, flourless chocolate cake, usually made with butter, eggs, maybe some cream and almond meal, and of course, dark and velvety melted chocolate with a high percentage of cacao and low amount of sugar. Dark chocolate also contains high levels of healthy antioxidants. And if you don't like chocolate cake, as I said, you can substitute for something else you really like. So here's an example of how you might eat this piece of cake in a modulated way, with modulated embodied self-awareness. Okay, so you're eating your slice of chocolate decadence while you're talking to someone, or reading, or checking email, or none of these things, but you've got a lot on your mind. In your mouth, chewing, it's definitely chocolatey and creamy. It's familiar. It settles into a mental list of formerly consumed dessert treats and merits in an imagined spreadsheet of comparison and categorization. You might be planning how you eat this, not too fast, and you have to discern how long to wait between bites as you're moving toward the completion of eating this, wow, increasingly tiny slice of cake. Maybe you were telling yourself that you were really enjoying this and tasting it, you're thinking. And you're convincing yourself in modulated thought that you're not rushing. And perhaps you're thinking things like, it's really good, or wonderful, or I need to thank this person for making this awesome dessert. Or you might be thinking about when and how to take a picture of the slice, like pre-eaten, one bite taken out, maybe to post on social media, and what you plan to say about it. Each bite lasts only seconds, and then you count and wait. You take another bite, the same as the last, moving another step toward finishing. Now it's gone, and you continue the thoughts. You tell yourself that you are full and complete, or that you want more, or that you have to get up and do the dishes, or pay the bill, or move on to the next thing. Or maybe you do want another slice. Okay. So that's a little bit exaggerated, but that's my example of modulated eating. And
Okay.
here's what I described as restorative eating. So maybe you want to just kind of settle into yourself for a minute, because this segment feels really different. It's a very different. You might just kind of feel yourself in your chair or wherever you're sitting, and close your eyes and take a couple of breaths. Just give yourself a chance to settle your system. Don't pay attention so much. Just kind of let it, what I'm about to read, kind of wash over you. And just take in whatever comes in. And you don't have to pay attention to track it all, okay? Fattiness spreads over the surface of your tongue as it warms in your mouth and melts. A feeling of blessing, hope, soothing in how it envelops and softens the tongue into a sense of receptivity. Like the tongue can just rest peacefully and contentedly in the bottom of your mouth. And then the chocolate flavors hit their notes along the tongue and register as cinnamon, cloves, earth, cacao, coffee, bitter and sweet. These flavors land right in the pleasure centers of your nervous system and spread into a relaxation response with a deep sigh and an aphrodisiacal tinge of hormones of full body warmth. Then come the grace notes against the swelling fatty base, a chocolate rush on the tongue, and then the whole mouth maybe maybe you haven't even felt the urge to chew yet, but only to move your tongue in and out like a baby's sucking motions that express the flavors and textures of a clearly now decadent piece of cake. And then the fading, the waning, the loss felt on swallowing. The ending that slowly and inexorably emerges and blossoms as the fat dissolves into tasteless saliva. Yes, a few lingering essences still adhering to the grooves of the tongue and between the teeth, and evoking a memory of what had just been, just moments ago, filling your entire body. And in this way, in your present moment, non-thinking felt experience, that's what decides when to take another bite, when to feel, when to swallow. Each bite is a timeless lifetime, a shameless ecstasy, really totally without shame and full of a contagious feeling of mischievous and forbidden pleasure. Yes, shameless ecstasy of softness, of sparks of flavor, each completely in itself and completely true. And strangely, there is no desire. There's no wanting. There's no waiting for something else to happen. No anticipation. Only your own melting and softening, as if you were in the arms of a completely safe and trusted loved one.
Wow, that is well, first of all, very different, but so evoking of just contentment and pleasure and joy and satiation, and I love it. Thank you for that. That was a great depiction of modulated versus embodied or restored. Yeah, restorative.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I don't always go there when I eat, but I can go there if I choose to go there. And I think that's what's important, is that it's like you're forest bathing. we don't always have time to do that, but the fact that we know that we could do that, that we could really be in the full presence of richness, flavor, beauty, comfort, peace, soothing,
Yeah.
and create the space in our lives to allow those things to happen
Hmm.
more.
I think it's really important what you just said, because I'm sure as we're listening, as I was even listening, I'm thinking, you know, how is this possible to do all the time? That was definitely coming up for me. And I've noticed that some days when I'm in more of a busy spiral, it's really hard for me to slow down at mealtime, especially lunch, when I'm in the middle of my workday. And I'm so aware of it. It takes me a lot of effort. Like I feel like almost, swimming upstream kind of effort to slow down, like, because all of my momentum is heading in this direction of, productivity or something like that. But knowing that we can, and that we don't always have to benefit from it, but like learning how to get there and practicing when we can, and maybe even dedicating certain meals or certain times of the week where we have more space to do that. I
Mhm.
think that makes it so much more attainable for anyone listening, or for people practicing, that this is not something that we have to do 100% of the time.
Yes.
Obviously, life is, when we have toddlers or kids getting out the door for breakfast, to school, and we're feeding them breakfast in the morning. Like, I remember those days when my kids were young. I mean, it's hard to slow down and enjoy your bowl of oatmeal when everyone around you is, throwing food and causing chaos, and you're trying to get kids dressed who are fighting against you, or whatever it is. Right? So there's like real life, and then, but even within a crazy real life of raising young kids or being really busy or whatever it is that we have going on, we can still designate time for ourselves in this way. And that
Yeah.
makes it feel so much more manageable and doable, and something we can practice.
There's something else about what you said, Sue, that I count as kind of on the pathway toward restoration, which is our awareness that we're not there.
Exactly. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
To be able to say to ourselves, I know there are times when I can be there. I know I have those times and moments of peace and grace. But to be able to just admit to ourselves, there's just too much going on right now, and I'm really missing that, and I'm feeling the loss of that, and all I can do now is manage.
Mm-hmm.
That's really big. I think that's really big. That I would count that as modulated.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that
Yeah.
we get it. We get that we do have a lot to do, and we can't get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
The danger, is slipping into dysregulation, where we're in those places of busyness, and all we do is beat ourselves up mentally.
Mm-hmm.
We think we're not good enough, that we're never going to get the kids out the door and dressed for school, that we're never going to be enough for the people around us, that all these tests are overwhelming, and that we're disappointed in ourselves, and
Mm-hmm.
we're ashamed of our limitations. So that's the difference between feeling dysregulated. It's an awareness of those emotions of hopelessness or despair or shame, versus an awareness of the emotions of, I'm just really busy right now, and I get it, and I get that I'm not out of control, and that feels kind of good that I'm not out of control, and that I'm
Mm-hmm.
managing okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, just tracking ourselves through those different states of embodiment can be incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. I just want to share a little snippet, something I've noticed lately, because, the pandemic has obviously been keeping us homebound. And right now we have 3 kids here at home, mostly older teenagers and college students, but, everyone's on Zoom all day. And there's a lot of action in the kitchen. And one thing I've noticed lately about myself, so we cook dinner at home pretty much every night because that's what most people are doing. And then there's, the sitting down to eat. And I love cooking, but it has been a long pandemic. So there's the cooking dinner, and then there's the sitting down to eat dinner, and then there's the dinner cleanup. And then what my partner and I do is we generally find something relaxing to do after dinner. It's kind of like our relaxing time of the day. And it's interesting. I've really been witnessing this in myself lately. I am eating dinner quickly. I think because I want to get to the relaxing part of the day. And so where generally I would be more inclined to slow down and linger at dinner and kind of really take in the sensations and the food. And, we make such good food together here. But I've witnessed this speeding up and accelerated almost like energy in my body at dinner time. And I finally started to look into it a little bit. And it's like, oh, it's because I know I still have to clean up. And I'm not really able to fully relax yet until that part's done. And then we get to the part of the day where we get to restore a little bit more. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of saying that because I think it's an example of what you're talking about, how life can come in. And I know a lot of people have had accelerated issues based on the pandemic for sure.
Uh-huh.
And life can happen in a way that all of a sudden we find ourselves in a pattern and we didn't even realize was coming up or occurring until it's got a little bit of traction. And so I've been really working with that lately myself. So thank you for kind of helping
Yeah,
me
that's
reveal
again,
that.
I just admire your insightfulness about yourself in terms of
Thank you.
what's happening inside your body. Um, you know, what I find in my own self and in my clients is that getting to a place of being able to do what you just did, which is just without any value judgment. Like it's not good or bad. That's just what happens to me. I rush through my dinner so I can get to be with my partner and we can be together. Um, that's beautiful. I mean, I think that's healthy, to just be able to non-judgmentally look at ourselves and our patterns and how we go through the day and when we feel overwhelmed and when we feel rushed and when we're pushing ourselves. And sure, we can also, learn ways to slow down and maybe not be so frantic. But we can't really do that well. And also the same thing applies to making healthy eating choices. We can't really do that if we're filled with self-judgment.
Yeah.
So if that's part of what we're noticing about ourselves, that we're judging ourselves, we're doing what we're doing, which I didn't feel that from you at all. When you were describing it, you were just reporting.
Yeah.
This is what happens, and I've noticed this, which I think is great. But if we notice that we're judging ourselves, like we're thinking, and I shouldn't be doing this, or my, embodied therapist said, no, you have to slow down. I can't slow down. Then it's the same, for me, it's the same therapeutic process that we can do with another person or even within ourselves, which is just to notice non-judgmentally that we're critical about ourselves. It's just an observation. It's just getting that when we feel stressed, that happens to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody who it doesn't happen to.
Good point. I think that's a really good point too, right?
Myself.
Yeah.
When I get overwhelmed and stressed, I'm just more self-critical, or or I get more worried or more anxious. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think the difference for me has come with just being able to name those things
Mm-hmm.
and to honor when I'm becoming dysregulated, and kind of looking around myself and looking around the room and looking around at the events of the day and saying, well, what could have set that off, or what happened today that was so stressful? And usually, there's a good reason,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can settle myself a little bit more. I can think, okay, now I get it. I get why I got so judgmental about myself.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great reminder, I think, for all of us that, there is the human consciousness, and human living is so imperfect and messy, and it's intense to be in a life. It's intense to live in this world. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect us to be able to hold these different practices 100% of the time, because obviously life is going to swoop in and throw us off balance, sometimes often. But that what I always remind myself and my clients is, can we recognize those moments, and then can we bring ourselves back to equilibrium or center or balance quicker and quicker? It's like the further we get off balance, the harder it is to come back.
Yeah.
But if we can kind of keep our eye on it, at least we can recognize where we need to rein things in, or pause, or take a moment for ourselves, or get support, or various things. So it's so great to just chat with you about these ideas, because they're so important, and yet obviously many of us struggle with them. So I can't wait to read your book. It'll be
Right.
great to see it all in a compilation of your work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Alan, it's been so good to have you on the podcast today. I feel like this conversation is so inspiring for me, and I'm just so grateful that you were able to, etch out some time in the midst of all that you have going on with your new book and your practice and your busy life too. So just very heartfelt gratitude for me, and I'm really glad that we got to connect and meet, and so grateful.
Same here. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of Satiate. Sending you my wholehearted wish for your health and happiness. And I will see you back here very soon.